You are listening to The Caregivers with Lon Kiefer.
Well, here we are in the new Caregivers Podcast studio, and I'm not happy with my background. Yours looks great, but welcome back, Dr. Danny Potts.
Well, thank you, Lon. It's a pleasure to be with you. And my background and my face are not up to standard either. But you know, we got to work with what we've got. So.
Well, no matter what angle I've gone after, I can't get rid of this. I might have to actually lose the weight to get rid of it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm flattered that. So you're our first repeat guest on the podcast, and you're the first guest of the new launch of the podcast, which kind of went by the wayside during COVID. But I listened to our old podcast, and I'm surprised that you decided to come back.
I enjoyed our podcast. I really did. I mean, I hope people got a lot out of it, but I'm telling you, I got a lot out of being involved with it because it was a lot of fun. It was we touched on a lot of topics, and I think it was good. But you know,
well, I'm off to a bad start already because I implied the podcast wasn't good. The podcast was excellent. I just talked too much. And, I have a YouTube channel and everything else that I'm doing plenty of talking. I need to do listening and ask good questions. So we didn't agree to do this because of the book, but I just finished reading your book, Bringing Art to Life, Reflections on Dementia and the Transforming Power of Art and Relationships. And it was powerful.
Well, thank you. It's from the heart, and it's from our experience, and that moves me to hear you say that because that's what I hope happens. I hope it speaks to people.
Well, it did to me, and your humility and is that the right word? Humbleness, humility, and candor. The pro and the per, professional caregiver, personal family caregiver. You're both. And we joked in the first podcast about how your personal experiences, and growth far outweighed your formal training. But, I will leave this wide open to you. Please tell us who you are and whatever you want to say to get us started.
Well, I again, it's a privilege to be back with you, Lon. I'm Danny Potts, Daniel C. Potts. I'm a neurologist in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I'm at the VA. I'm also affiliated with the University of Alabama here in Tuscaloosa, and I'm a general neurologist whose dad happened to have Alzheimer's disease, and so I became especially interested in dementia because of that, and because of the caregiving, aspect of it. Also, I was not Dad's primary caregiver; that was my mother. But I was a secondary caregiver, and I'm an only child, so I was involved, and that caregiving experience, Lon, as we talked about before, really changed my life, my practice, my outlook, my focus, and what I think is important. And so it's Dad's story that motivates me. It's Mother's story, and it's those like them that I've been associated with since then that really motivate me to get out there and talk and to tell people what I've learned.
I want to read something to you from the book. You wrote it, but I don't know if you've read it yourself lately. And I apologize for my eyes deviating away. I did my homework. I read the book. It's phenomenal, and this really struck me. This is you speaking about you. When confronted with the reality of Dad's Alzheimer's disease, my powerlessness over it, and the feeling I was letting him and my mother down by not being able to give the kind of help I longed to give and knew they needed, I sank into a state of panicked helplessness, fear, resentment, depression, self-pity, and shame. And it went, I'll stop there, but it goes longer. And thank you so much for that. I mean, it goes two ways. Professional caregivers are people too. And as people, being a professional caregiver doesn't make it necessarily any easier for us. In some ways, it makes it harder. And I just thank you for sharing that. And you said that changed when your dad went to the daycare, and they came into your life as well.
Yes.
So I'll let you talk a little bit about how that, because this thing in the back here, I don't know how to point to it, but the heart with the two bands stands for awareness, acceptance, and allowance. Awareness of what's really going on, acceptance of the things that need to change, and once doing that, allowance. Who are you going to allow into your life, and who are you going to take this journey with? And then I'll let you talk about that experience of meeting these other people.
Well, thank you for reading that part, because that's obviously a linchpin for the whole book. You know, is for, because I didn't do well with any of those three that you just mentioned. I wasn't accepting it. I didn't recognize it. I felt I did a terrible job of allowing anybody in to help me, because I'm supposed to know how to do this. I'm supposed to do this, And so I did not do a good job with all that. And it actually took Dad himself, with help, to break through all of that and to really get inside me, so that I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what's really happening. This is reality, and I have been woefully blind, to see this, and oh, by the way, it has a struggled side, but it also has a beautiful side, and Dad showed me all that. So I think it was, he was enabled to break through my facade, of resentment and all of that, because of the people that helped him do that. And these were the fine, wonderful caregivers down at Caring Days Adult Daycare. They are the ones that shored up his personhood and gave him the tools to speak, when he couldn't do it because of dementia. And so they are the ones. And Caring Days is an adult day program, and many of your listeners are familiar with adult day programs. They are in communities all over the country. They are often started by concerned individuals in the community who realize people need help, during the day caring for folks. A lot of these are faith-based. This one particularly is, with over 20 different congregations, different faiths involved, but they see a need and they fill it. And respite programs are similar. Respite programs that provide, some day assistance. But that Dad, Mother realized that, hey, I can't take care of him all the time during the day. He's a big, strong, 70-year-old guy, very healthy, not used to being confined in a house, and he got very tough to handle. And so we realized that we had to have help. And there was Caring Days. And they shored Dad up at a time when he was depressed. He realized some of his losses. He realized that he couldn't get his story out. He couldn't do those things that people depended on him to do. And he was broken because of that. And they didn't care at Caring Days. What they cared about was, this is Lester Potts. We are going to know and love and engage the Lester we see coming through the door every day. Not the one that his family's grieving over, but the one that's actually still here with us.
Mm-hmm. I did some research. You shared a quote in the last podcast, and I'm going to get her name wrong. Madeline L'Engle of A Wrinkle in Time fame. Because you are not what I would have you to be, I blind myself to who in truth you are. Now, I read that. You did it from memory on the last podcast, but that is so true, and that's I'm asking you to talk a little bit more about personhood, and because it's not a concept that is easy to grasp, because I think particularly for caregivers and their loved ones, they often get like, the more I love this person, the more I care for this person, the better I'm going to make this. And that's simply not the case. And if you continue to want them to be who I would have them to be, rather than who they are, you're really, this is an acceptance step.
It clearly is. You know, the first time I read that quote, I thought, this is profound. I don't know what she was talking about when she said that or wrote that, but she certainly understands the caregiving experience, because that really spoke to me, and it really was a convicting type of thing also, because I realized I'd done that with Dad. I think a lot of us, most of us, if we have a relationship with someone that we love, you know, when that person gets dementia, part of what we're losing is the relationship itself, and part of the reason we're losing that is because it's different every minute to what we're accustomed to. And so we've got this relationship that's sort of iconic to us, and when it starts to morph and change into something else, we sense that as loss of relationship, you know. But I don't necessarily think it is loss of relationship. I think it's a change. It's one element of the relationship is changing, and we're not willing to change because, you know, to meet that person where they are, which Lingle says. And so I have to be willing to get rid of, to put aside and grieve over the relationship, the icon of the relationship that we had 20 years ago. And at least set it aside so that it doesn't cloud my view of Dad today, so that I don't hold him responsible to be something he can't be anymore. He has these losses. So the first part is I can't deny that he actually has the losses. I've got to be willing to accept that, and then realize, number two, that he's a human being that is different than he was before. So now what's required of me? What's required of me? Well, it's required that I meet him where he is today and meet him where he is tomorrow, and it's going to be different tomorrow. And so she really understood that. And I wish I had known this when Dad was going through Alzheimer's, and I didn't know this. Now, I discovered it through the art, which we haven't talked about yet, but I didn't know it to start with.
I'm going to keep doing hopefully better and speaking less, but I'm feeling the same rhythm that we had before. You naturally, you're gifted in so many ways that you naturally go where things need to go, and where I would have gone next was that the importance of art. And for your dad, it ended up being watercolors. For me, it's always been humor and how to express myself in that way, and you can get away with a lot with that, and you can learn a lot. But the art was a complete surprise to you, was it not?
It was, and what we're doing, you and I, right now, is we're wading into that well of the self. You know, there are different ways to get in there with our loved one, and humor, and art, and pets, and children, and nature, and all of those things are other ways. But So that leads us into personhood, selfhood. Now, did I believe years ago when I was going through this with Dad that he was an intact person as he was going through this? No, I'll have to say I did not. And have I changed my view? Yes, I have. So the people at Caring Days, realizing, as British researcher Thomas Kitwood did years ago, that a human being with dementia may be experiencing at times less of a sense of self than they did before, and realizing that we, as their care environment, have the responsibility to help bolster that sense of self when they are faltering with it through caring support, compassion, being a compassionate listener, being non-judgmental, staying in the moment, offering activities like we've just talked about. They realized that they had to do that for their people, and they did that for Dad. And it just so happened that, and they didn't know what was going to be his, method, what were going to be the methods that were needed for him to bring out his personhood, but they offered him a palette of them. And one of those was art. And if you would have asked us that knew him, we'd have thought, no, that's not the right one for Dad. Because he's not an artist. I mean, we've never seen him draw or paint anything. My mother was with him for almost 50 years before he died. She had never seen him draw or paint anything. Now, he created stuff because he built stuff. He built fences, and he was creative, but it wasn't art. But it just so happened that Dad's language was affected severely. He had a hard time getting his words out. He was very frustrated because he couldn't figure out how to do stuff with tools anymore because of his apraxia, which is one of those things that happens to people with Alzheimer's. They forget learned tasks, how to do things. So that's called apraxia. He couldn't do those things anymore. So here he was with a self inside, a suffering self, yeah, but it needed to express itself. Well, one of those palette things was George Parker and his art. George was a retired artist. He was not an art therapist, but he was an artist that had fallen on hard times himself. He'd had a cardiac arrest. He'd been in a coma. Everybody thought he was going to die. And when he woke up and got off the ventilator, he said, I've been saved to use my art, to share my art in people living with dementia. That's what he told people. I mean, he had never done anything like that before. So there's a story there also. But George volunteered at Caring Days with the people that were there. Dad was one of them, and offered them the opportunity to do watercolor art, which was really his forte. And so Dad really fell in love with that, and it offered him freedom of expression. And of course, he painted, early childhood memories. People from his youth. Sawmilling scenes. He was a sawmiller with his dad. Farm scenes, wildlife, woods, and all that stuff. That smokehouse. That was centering to him, and was of that deep well of the self. He was dipping into the deep well of the self to express that for all of us. And I suspect it was to provide him his comfort to himself. But what it did is it proved to me and others, Lester's still in there, and personhood is still intact. Maybe different. Maybe he's not always cognizant of it, but there. And so the most important thing of all, and I used to not say this, I used to be a defender of personhood and say, no, the most important thing is the personhood is still there. I actually think the most important thing is that I regard it as still being there. The difference is, can I prove it? No. But can I determine that I'm going to see it, that I'm going to look for ways to find it, and therefore treat that person like a whole person? Yeah, that's the most important thing. You see, the onus falls back on me. To regard something as being there, because if we regard something as being present, often it is. You see? The difference in my focus now, and so it's a change in viewpoint. So I've seen the light. So I'm changing my view now, and to help others change their view, no, let's regard it as being there. I determine, I impart, I see it. So therefore I'm going to act like it, and I'm going to treat somebody with compassion and deference.
Very spiritual.
It is. This is a spiritual walk, and I'm convinced of that for sure.
Yes, and you wrote that. I'm going to come back to humor before we're done, but not now. Yeah. You wrote in the book, one may practice the spiritual in dementia care and not know it, or at least not name it. Seeking the spiritual in dementia care means reaching for the depths of another person, coming into contact with the core of authenticity, and in order to do this, we must find a way, yada, 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 through. You talked also about how religions and others, I'm going to get this wrong, that we learn or that we grow through loss. Am I saying that correctly?
I think so. That's where, it's in the depth. It's in the depth that we learn who we are, and that we learn who others are, that are in the depth with us, I think.
Yeah, I found it
there.
Many different spiritual traditions teach the importance of diminishment in the process of enlightenment. And this might be TMI, but I feel that, I say from the stage as a joke, I had my 55th birthday, then you usually get applause, and then I say about 6 years ago, and then I go, I'm a pluser, 55 plus. I am loving the avenue of comedy, but the point of it is that I'm a much better man in so many ways now that certain things have diminished. I'm much more connected to people and experiences. I think I always was, but much more now, and there's meaning to it now that I didn't grasp before. I find that when I go into something, I look for a peace for each party in our interactions rather than progress. And I just I feel that through those we grow and diminish throughout our entire lives. And I did not see that recognizing that can be a spiritual twist. I struggle whenever we call something spiritual. But this Madeline Langell is now I have to read A Wrinkle in Time, which I have never. Yeah. And she has so many quotes that are speaking about this. So many.
I think she deeply understood, of course, the spiritual side of things, and there are others that I look up to that understand so much more about this than I do. But many traditions do talk about, that spiritual growth is accomplished more by letting go of things than by acquiring anything, and learning how to let go. Because I believe that we have the hard wiring, from a neuroscience standpoint, but also the light, the inner light, from a spiritual standpoint, innately. And so that it often takes a series of losses to get us to that point, to bring it out, to clear our vision so that we can see that. I tell students all the time in our programs that when we work with students, that the classroom of dementia care, the classroom of dementia and caring for someone with dementia has been a classroom for life at large, and it truly is. I think that I've learned more about how to be a human being walking through this with Dad and others, and my mother and others, because there have been many, many more after that. But I learned how to see with Dad. And because I learned how to see, and when I say see, I mean with some clarity about what's really going on here and how we should respond, if we can, to that. So that opened my eyes so that I'm able to help others now, I hope. And so it is very much a learning how to deal with loss, and learning how to see the uplifts, feel the uplifts in the midst of all the downdrafts, and looking for the energy and the inspiration inside that very loved one of ours who is struggling with dementia, because that's where the light came from, that kindled me. And Albert Schweitzer, another great spiritual mind, said something like that. There are times when our light goes out, our light grows dim. Yeah. And we look for the light of others to rekindle ours, and that's what happened with Dad. Yeah.
One of the other things that Madeline has said is that she is presently, or she's passed now, but she is all the ages she's ever been. And I thank you for turning me on to her greatness in seeing these things. And I know Wrinkle in Time is a classic, but I've never read it, and I will now. So I'm grateful for that. In your book, you also mentioned that some of this, mortality, facing mortality is difficult for healthcare providers because they have to then see it in themselves. And I'm working too hard to bring up that point. I think that it's obvious to us, but it's not obvious to all. Being a caregiver, a professional caregiver, does not make you immune to this. It in many ways you're more poorly prepared than if you went into it naively. Because then when things come to you that you didn't know, you don't judge yourself as much.
Yes. Well, and I don't think you're overemphasizing it at all, because it is truly a barrier. It is one of the major barriers to living well with dementia. And so let me explain that. I've talked to people, many people living with dementia, about the diagnosis, about the day they got the diagnosis. What was it like to get diagnosed, and then subsequently to get care under the direction of a physician? And almost to the single last person among all of them, it was a terrible experience. So this first came to light when I went to the Dementia Action Alliance conference several years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I saw a panel of individuals living with dementia of various kinds on stage, and a moderator asking them questions. And one of those questions was, "Tell me how it was to get diagnosed. How did you feel? Did you feel supported?" And all this. All of them said it was terrible. They didn't feel supported. They didn't feel compassion. They didn't feel empathy. They weren't given a plan. You know, it was like they were told this diagnosis and there was no hope. You know, they were not paired with somebody who's, you know, like people with cancer often are, paired with somebody living with the diagnosis, given a social worker to help, you know, find resources. No, none of that. And so, and I think part of that, to go back to our point about afraid to confront mortality, I think a lot of that goes back to professional caregivers, and I'm talking in this particular instance about physicians that make the diagnosis of dementia, many of whom are neurologists. It's tough for us to break bad news to people. You know, we're trained to use, you know, technology and science and pharmacology and all of these things to treat diseases and to hopefully offer cures for diseases. In neurology, we have a lot we can't cure, but yet we see that as progress. But the concept of living well without actually making somebody's disease better, and, oh, by the way, acknowledging that they have a terminal illness that we can't do anything about, and we're going to tell them about that, that's hard for us to do. And we bump up against our mortality and our sense of failure, and we shatter this false persona that we have, that we need to be the perfect, you know, physician scientist in this equation, and we can't be. And so I say that it is a barrier to helping someone live well, because if my goal is helping someone live well, then in order to do that, I need to tell them, okay, here's what you have, and here's what we can expect, and all of that. But here are the tools to help you weave that into your life. You know, if you diagnose somebody with diabetes, you don't just, you know, say, "Oh, yeah, you have that, but we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to give you ways to deal with that." Of course not. You give them ways to deal with that. That has to become a thread of their life. Otherwise, they'll not do well at all. You have to do the same thing with dementia. This is now who we are. You don't need to be ashamed of it. You're not crazy. You don't need to put it in the shadows. We have to live with this. Our storyline has to contain this, and here are the tools that we're going to give you to help you do that. And that's what we're not good at. And I say we. I'm talking about me. You know, people that have not had a caregiving experience like we have, and they're healthcare providers. It's hard because, you know, we're not really trained that way. But the focus of living well is difficult when we can't break bad news to somebody and help them incorporate that bad news into their new life story. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, it absolutely does. And there was a time in the book, and I don't remember when it was, but several different times it talks about the genuine connectedness of what is happening here and appreciating it for the moment that is that you do connect, or that you do find the person, or you know, if you can't look at every interaction for an improvement, but to look at it for an awareness, an understanding. Gosh, I want to go into so many directions here. Several times in my life, I've met very famous people. One of them, I sat on a plane right next to Nicolas Cage, and I don't know if that's very famous, but you know, it's up there. And I knew, of course, who he was, but I wouldn't let him know that I knew who he was. We were just two guys talking about baseball. It was a crazy coincidence. And then later, when I got off the plane, there was somebody. I think they called him Mr. Jones or something like that. But it was clearly the driver was there to pick him up, but they're not going to say Nicolas Cage. And when they were connecting, I turned around and I said, "By the way, I'm a big fan." And he said to me, "Thank you, and thank you for back there." I'm off of the point that I wanted to make, but I'm not off of the point describing the experience I had. That not acknowledging who he was and just being connected with him was so much more valuable to me than if I'd have gotten his autograph.
Exactly.
And well, thank you for saying exactly, because I was starting to wonder if I was, on the point here.
No, I'll tell you what it made me think of. It made me think of making a connection with somebody living with a disability in spite of knowing ahead of time who they are with their disability. Yeah. So we talk to caregivers and students all the time. I know that this person has dementia. I know that you are judging what this experience is going to look like. I mean, we can't help but do that. I've got to do art with this person. In our class, the students pair with people living with dementia to do art. I got to do art with them. I don't know if they'll be able to do it. I don't know if I'll be able to talk to this person because I know they're living with Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. But if we can get the students to be mindful enough and non-judgmental enough and open-minded enough to say, no, you know what, I don't care really the labels that are on this person. Nicolas Cage, superstar. I don't really care about that. What I care about is making a human connection. So we're going to make a human connection at a deeper level than all that stuff, where we're all kind of the same. And that's what we ask students to do. So that's what that made me think of. And you were able to do that. And he appreciated it, but you can tell that by his responses. He's not used to people doing that with him, nor are people with Alzheimer's used to people doing that with them. So, I mean, I can clearly see the connection in that.
Well, thank you for seeing that, because I'm not looking at the clock, but I'm amazed at how. I think we could do this all night, and there's some things I really want to get your input on. I have been blessed that I've had several careers. I've had a traditional career as a nurse and as a leader in senior living, and then I had a couple of years where I was speaking and consulting, and now I'm back in a more traditional way, although I'm sure by all the accoutrements here you'd think that that I'm but I am working at a place called Milford Wellness Village, which is a former hospital that moved, in a rural hospital that moved. Many across the country are closing, and the challenge is, what are you going to do with this bedrock of a community and this real estate that could turn into a blight? And we've got 22 different providers on the campus. Some have to do with dementia, but it's not just elderly. There's a lot of others. All I'm trying to say here is that I have been blessed now at this stage in my career where I'm in the middle of all that. I have no clear definition on me, and I can go any number of directions, and things like this can happen in ways that they couldn't happen before. And that's a weird way to just say that I'm just loving figuring this out. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to speak a little bit about. So we had Robin Williams and his end with dementia. We have Bruce Willis, who now has what did they say? Frontal? Is it? I think it's the frontotemporal. Yeah. Frontotemporal. And Glenn Campbell also had his. And I want to talk a little bit about Glenn Campbell's, but there is just not enough awareness, and I don't know whether it's the neurologists of the world or the other professionals of the world that are intimidated by these conversations, or because they want to be exacting in them, and you can't be exact with this. Like Robin Williams was on the wrong medication. because a differential diagnosis is very hard to get. But what do you think it is? Is it that there's not an easy... One of the things I'm doing, here I am, I'm filibustering. One of the things that we're doing is teaching chronic disease self-management education. They have it in cancer, they have it in general chronic disease, they have it in diabetes, and they have it in chronic pain. And the VAs of the world have recently identified being a caregiver as being akin to having a chronic disease. But they do not have any of these programs for dementia. And maybe because it's self-management, and the assumption is they can't self-manage.
Right. Well, at a deep level, I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think that the deepest level is that we don't regard people as being a person if they have dementia. So really it all goes back in my mind to personhood, because the personhood then creates the stigma against people living with dementia and the shame around it. Families can deal with a lot of chronic illnesses in their loved ones, and I've seen it for 25 or more than 25 years of practicing. But you talk about something affecting mama's mind, and then it's a different story, because it's dealing with the personhood. They think it's dealing with the person. This is not my mama anymore. And so if her kidneys fail, it's still my mama. But if her brain fails, they don't believe it's the family member. So I think the underlying root cause of the way that the world treats people and is sort of is in the dark about a lot of these conditions is we feel like a person's not a person anymore. So then there's all the shame and the stigma associated with that. The other things are that, dementias like Lewy body and frontotemporal are not as well known by the general public, and the media doesn't know as much about those. The Alzheimer's Association and others have done a great job of getting the word out about Alzheimer's disease, what that looks like. It's more common, so we know about that. And I'm saying we as being the general public, the lay public. But we don't know as much about the other kinds of dementia. And so I think when you hear about a star that has that, people are clamoring, saying, what does that mean? What is that? How is that different than Alzheimer's? So we need to do a better job, as a society, but especially as physicians, as physician leaders, as advocates, writing about, getting on social media, telling people, what is that? We need to recognize the associations, the organizations that are advocates for these folks living with these particular conditions, Lewy body disease, frontotemporal, vascular dementia, etc. We need to listen to what they say. We need to have the media, begin to tell the story about folks that have these kinds of conditions, so that we can catch people up to speed on these. Then there's the research issue too. We need research monies. We need advocacy organizations that are supported. We need our government leaders to grant us, the kind of funding that we need to research these conditions. So there's a lot going on here, but I think the bottom line is personhood. We have to consider the human who's living with these conditions. I
wish I could place where I saw this, but I saw the most unbelievable example of acceptance and personhood. I remember it vividly, but I don't remember where it was. It was a lady. She was with her husband. He was the one that was that had the diagnosis, and he was kind of a fidgeter. He was touching things and exploring things with his hands and doing a lot of things that otherwise socially would have been considered kind of inappropriate. And she had just such a peaceful way where she just tap him every now and then and distract him, and she had this like smile on her face, like she was, and I may get in trouble here, but it was akin to like I'm proud of this, this childlike exploration that he was doing. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and I know that lady was going through agony at times, and yet it was just it was beautiful. Something else that I found beautiful, and maybe I think it's shared with Glenn Campbell and his song "I'm Not Going to Miss You." Yeah. I'm going to read this. This is the stanza: "You're the last person I will love. You're the last face that I will recall, and best of all, I'm not going to miss you. Now, that can be very sad if you look at it one way. It can be beautiful if you look at it another. And the personhood, it's they only know what they know. They don't at that point they don't know why it's happening, or they just know what's happening. And the more you can be there with them and just enjoy that moment rather than try and change it or improve it. I mean, you have to keep people safe, but I just right to the very end, I think people often love and or their profession. It's very hard to accept that they can't fix this.
Yeah,
they can just be in the moment and make it better.
Well, you mentioned Glenn Campbell, and one of the things I was fortunate enough to do was when the documentary came out, Glenn Campbell, I'll Be Me. I reviewed that for Maria Shriver's media folks and wrote an article about that, and I was so thankful to get to do that, because the film, and I've since watched the film many times because it's very impactful to me.
Absolutely.
And it's just, and so, and one of the, and you know, there's several things about it, but one of the things that I love to bring out is when Glenn is early in the film, when Glenn is being tested, you know, and he's going through the mini mental status exam, which we often, you know, is one of the cognitive tests that we give, and he can't answer the questions, he can't answer the questions, he can't. But at the end of one of the I can'ts, he says, "But I can play a guitar." Yeah. So in other words, he's sending up a banner. I like he's sending up a banner. Glenn Campbell on a banner says, "I'm still here." You know, I love that, and you know, and that was his personhood. You know, it was tied all up in that music.
Yeah.
And thank God for his family who said, you know what, you know, and Glenn, even as I understand it, you know, decided, hey, let's do this. But the family who gave him the opportunity to go out like that
and let those cameras roll.
Concert.
Yeah.
Oh my, it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing Madeline L'Engle said, and this is selfish, I want to get this in here because my big thing is humor. I do stand-up comedy, clean corporate stand-up comedy, and I'm not trying to promote that I do that, but for me, it is such a hard craft, and well, you know, it comes easy for me, but it's such a difficult craft, and what you have to be able to do is communicate effectively, very quickly, and very efficiently to a large group of people. And you can write a sentence that has 8 words in it and get it down to 5 and emphasize one a certain way and get a different impact. And it's just, it is so helpful to me. And to me, it just, I look for the humor in things, a healthy understanding of moments others reject. And Madeline L'Engle said, the only way to cope with something deadly serious is to try to treat it lightly. This woman was amazing.
She was. She's clearly very, very, she's brilliant, but she's also has depth about her. You know, I look at humor as one of those great equalizers. You know, a city park, you know, in green spaces. You go to a city park and you see people of all different backgrounds, all different races, all different ages, and they're all together, and kind of there's an equalization there. You see the same thing at sports, you know, with sports. Well, humor is also a great equalizer for me. You know, so for instance, in our program Bringing Art to Life, where we pair students with people living with dementia, we often have humorous things that happen in there. And, you know, when everybody's laughing together and slapping each other on the back and just guffaw, nobody knows who has dementia and who's a student. You know, we're all together. It's an equalizer, and I think it's a means of connection that caregivers can have, you know, with their loved ones. If you're laughing with your loved one, you're right there together. You don't have to say anything. So it's just, there's a relationship there. It's just like you're talking about, a relationship in the moment.
Yeah. So poetry. You snuck a poem book in on us, a poetry book in on us. There's 2 things.
I couldn't call it a poetry book, or nobody would, you know, read it. So.
Well, there's 2 things in this book that I really love. I don't do it as much as I did it when I was younger, but I used to write a lot of poetry. And I love storytelling, and you've told many, many stories in this. There's kind of I think there's 5 parts in the book, and one of them is when you're kind of unburdening yourself, and then you go into the stories, and then you go into the poetry, and then you bring it back. I don't know, maybe I'm missing one.
Yeah, no, you're good.
But did you find poetry through this?
I did. So when I was struggling with Dad's illness and feeling very woefully inadequate and stuff in the early stages of his art, when we began to see the art come out, I was inspired to create also, because I thought it was making him better. I saw that it made him better. And so I think my wife perceived that, and I'm a creative person. I mean, I sing and all that stuff, but I had not been a writer. But my wife kind of sensed that I was looking for my voice, my creative voice, and so she got me a poetry anthology of Henry Van Dyke, who was he was on Woodrow Wilson's cabinet, and he was a Presbyterian pastor and taught at, I think, Princeton or somewhere. But I read that book, and it deeply moved me. And so I started writing poetry, and it was kind of strange because I would stay up late at night and write it, get up in the middle of the night and write a poem, and then I'd read the poem and not realize, dadgum, I can't believe I wrote that. It doesn't sound like me. And so I got very little sleep. But what it did is it gave me this opportunity to express myself. Well, Lon, I've continued to write. I mean, this was before Dad died in 2005, 2006. I started, and I'm continuing to write 3 or 4 poems a week. I probably got 2,000 poems I've written, and it's
you're prolific. I mean,
I love it. I love it. And some people may say, he's got a problem. Well, I probably do. But it really centers me, and it helps me deal with my emotions. And I feel kind of the same way as I do when I walk out in the woods and take photos, because I also like to do that. But because I'm centered in the moment. I'm thinking about words. I think it's good for my brain. I'm thinking about how to say things, and so I love it. And there's a whole the use of poetry and the use of literature in dementia care is also well known, and is an activity that's therapeutic storytelling and all that stuff is something that's done. But I love poetry. I love reading it, writing it, etc.
Well, the whole thing with me speaking over the years is trying to teach whatever lesson or message that I have to share through storytelling. And one of my favorite ones is the story about Garfield, and you're talking about the personhood and that they're still in there. And it's this long story about how I'm going to protect Garfield because I didn't want him to be disrespected, but in the meantime I disregarded him. And earlier you had said, I don't remember where you said it. It was one of the many times that I wanted to interrupt and say, but I didn't. Is that the people that are going through this deserve to be part of their own process.
That's right. And
protecting them is not fair to them. I mean, yes, protecting them from injury, but making decisions for them when they could, because if you throw the softball at them and they can't hit it out of the park, you didn't lose anything by trying. But if they can hit the daggone thing, you've got gold. So it's just I thought of there was a 5th section of your book that I missed, and that was the 31 lessons.
Yeah.
And I love the quote that you led that with. Live as if you're to die tomorrow and learn as if you were to live forever, Mahatma Gandhi. And I want to make sure that you get to do, with what time we have left, what you feel you need to accomplish on this podcast. I have selfishly accomplished several things. One, I've heard from a professional caregiver and their personal experience and how it changed them. I got to throw in humor, because I've called myself for 35 years professionally a retired comic, because I did comedy when I was young, and then I quit doing comedy, but I took the mindset of a comic everywhere I went, and it served me very well. My saying now is let humor work, and that is my art. Yours, you have found is well, you always knew about music, but you found it's poetry. Your dad's was painting, but getting in touch with that side of the brain, letting go of some of the ego, is is one of the biggest stories that I take from my time with you.
Well, no, I think I feel great about this because we've touched on so many things. It seems like we've been talking for a long time, and I could talk to you all night, like you said. I don't know. There's not a whole lot else I think I need to touch on, but I will say a couple things. I think that I acknowledge that I didn't do a great job as a caregiver for Dad, because I was in denial, and I missed a lot of opportunities to see Dad and to have a relationship with him there. But I also will tell you that I don't judge myself for that now. I don't shame myself for that, because what came out of that was a whole lot of growth and a whole lot of opportunities to help other people do the things that I didn't do well. And so that's what I'm trying to do now. I also want to tell people that if we see this experience of living with our loved one who has dementia as an opportunity to offer more love rather than less, as an opportunity to let things come out of ourselves that are potentials for our own growth. And I'm quoting a fabulous, wonderful man named James Houston, Dr. James Houston, who is a theologian, who is also a caregiver for his wife, who said, you know what, my wife Rita is bringing things out of me that are potentials for my growth. And if we look at this as a growth experience, not negating the parts of it that are terrible, we don't want to see we don't want to see our loved one suffering with this, but they have it, and so we can choose. It's like Viktor Frankl said, you can't take away my ability to choose in any given situation how I'm going to respond. That can't be taken away from a person. So we have the ability to choose if we're going to be resentful about this, or if we're going to say, no, you know what, I'm going to love more, I'm going to be more compassionate, I'm going to grow as a human being. We can choose to do that. And I will tell you that creativity is one of the ways that enables us to do that, enabling people to find their creative voice, whatever it may be, and laugh a lot with them, get in nature with them, play with a pet with them, get children around them, reminisce about old stuff, talk about food, talk about breakfast, grandmama's breakfast, these are things that music. These are things that bring people back to themselves, and we can have a relationship with somebody living with dementia. And I think we can address a lot of the problems around dementia care if we tackle the stigma about personhood and say, no, you know what, I believe they're still there. I'm going to treat them that way. So therefore, we need to do our best. We need to support them with research dollars. We need to support them with education. So these are the things that I'd say. And, this book is about all of that. And it's about my growth as a physician and as a caregiver and as a human being, through the process of walking alongside Dad, with this and honoring Mother as a caregiver. And so,
That's amazing. By the way, I wish I got it on Kindle. I wish I'd have bought the paperback so I could have held it up. So I'm so glad that you did that. I'm not going to validate that you didn't do well by your father in the early. I'm not going to validate that, but I understand why you say that. It's important for you to say it because it changed you and you evolved and you grew and you learned. I'm just realizing that we did not talk about virtual things because that's something you didn't go into it in the book but you referenced it, and a lot of what I'm doing now with caregivers is virtual, and I think that it is not as good as individual, but you can touch people that otherwise wouldn't. They'd be left out, and you can offer experiences that you otherwise. We're just going to have to do this again.
Well, I can quickly touch on this and say that some of the things that we love to do now are work with a company called Embodied Labs, which does virtual reality first-person dementia experiences for caregivers and others, professional, lay, students, etc., so that you can put the goggles on and you can be in the shoes of somebody living with these various conditions in real-world situations. And it helps develop empathy for those situations. And I also will say that we've done a lot with virtual art experiences, so museum gallery experiences. We've worked with the Yale Art Gallery in New Haven with Angel Duncan, who is our executive arts director in our foundation, and have virtual art tour experiences with caregivers and people living with dementia. And then we do an art activity afterwards. This is all virtual.
Yeah.
So we send a kit to somebody or have them purchase stuff to do art with, and we can do this virtually. And so there are ways to use technology to make things better when we can't get face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And how can we find you and your book and your dad's art? How can we find you?
Well, the book, Bringing Art to Life, is on Amazon.com. It's probably the best place to get it. If you put my name, Daniel Potts, in there and just put that, you'll go to my author page and it's there. You can also email me on cognitive-dynamics.org. There's a contact site there. That's our foundation. And I'm at the VA in Tuscaloosa and seeing veterans all day long and love that. I love taking care of veterans, and they're inspiring to me. And so, but yeah. And I've also got social media sites. I'm on Twitter. If you put Daniel C. Potts, you'll find me there. I'm on Instagram. I share a lot of Dad's art. Lester'sLegacy.com is a website that contains Dad's art. You can order prints. You can order note cards. See this beautiful art Lester created. So
amazing. I am going to go back and measure the amount of time I let you talk versus how much I spoke, and hopefully I gave you the lion's share of it.
I thought it worked well. I always enjoy talking to you. I think it's great.
Well, Dr. Danny Potts, you might be a caregiver, and thank you for caring.
Thank you for having me on, Lon. Have a great day, sir.